I've never been the loudest in the room. Never needed to be. Power isn't about who talks the most. It's about who people listen to when it really matters. And me, people listen. That day was no different. Same city, same rhythm. A world that never slows down, filled with people too busy to notice the small shifts in the air. But I notice. I always do. I stood at my usual spot, back against the counter, eyes scanning the room. The hum of conversations mixed with the distant wail of a siren outside. A normal day, or at least it seemed that way. I'd built my name on results, not reputation. People knew what I brought to the table. Competence, control, confidence. No gimmicks, no shortcuts. That's why when I spoke, people paid attention. And if someone thought they could challenge that, they'd learn the hard way. That's when they walked in. A group, moving like they owned the place. Their steps measured, their chins high, radiating the kind of confidence that doesn't come from skill, but from believing the world owes you something. Authority without substance. I've seen their kind before. They thrive on perception, on the way people react when they enter a room. They expect respect without earning it, and the moment they don't get it, that's when they show their true colors. I watched them from the corner of my eye, keeping my posture relaxed. They hadn't noticed me yet, but it wouldn't be long. People like that always seek out control. And when they don't have it, they try to take it. The air shifted, a tension subtle but undeniable. The storm was coming. They just didn't know yet who they were up against. And when they did, it'd be too late. I knew the moment they saw me. It was in the way their eyes flickered. Just for a second. Before their expressions hardened. Like they had already decided how this was going to go. Like they had seen my kind before, and knew exactly what to do. They were wrong. The tallest one led the pack. Expensive suit, polished shoes, the kind of guy who spoke with his chest, not because he had something worth saying, but because he wanted to be the loudest voice in the room. Behind him, the usual entourage, a mix of arrogance and blind loyalty. They flanked him like shadows, nodding at every word, laughing at every forced joke. And me? I stayed where I was, unmoved, unimpressed. Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit that like button, share it with friends, and subscribe for more awesome content. It really helps out the channel. And while you're at it, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. All right, let's keep going. He stepped forward, just close enough to invade my space but not close enough to make it obvious. Classic intimidation tactic. I've seen it before. It doesn't work on me. You look comfortable. His voice was smooth, controlled, practiced. I didn't respond, just let the silence stretch between us. He smirked, glancing at his team like he had already won. You must not know who I am. Ah, there it is, the old, do you know who I am? Routine. The thing about people like him, their power only exists if you acknowledge it. I leaned back slightly, my expression unreadable. Should I? The smirk twitched. Just for a second. A crack in the perfect mask. He wasn't used to that. He was used to people nodding, scrambling, to show respect, to fall in line. He squared his shoulders. We run things here. People like you play by our rules. There it was. The flex. The unspoken threat wrapped in polite words. I could feel his team watching, waiting for my reaction. Maybe they expected me to back down, to nod along, to accept whatever power play they were attempting. Instead, I chuckled. Low, amused. Like he had just told me a joke. His jaw tightened. Something funny? I met his gaze, steady and unshaken. Just thinking how often I hear that line, and how often it turns out to be untrue. The shift in the air was almost tangible. His team exchanged glances, sensing the change. The balance of power had just tilted, slightly but enough. He wasn't in control anymore. Not entirely. I could see it in his eyes. A flicker of uncertainty. But he wasn't going to back down. Not yet. I don't think you understand. His voice dropped lower, his smile sharpening. I'm giving you a chance to make this easy. Take it. A final warning. I let the silence sit between us again. My heart beat steady. This was the moment. The part where most people cracked, folded, did whatever they needed to do to make life easier, but I wasn't most people. I tilted my head slightly, my expression unreadable. Or what? His smile faded. Just a little. That's when I knew. He had no real answer. He expected compliance, expected me to react like everyone else did, to fall in line, to recognize his so-called authority. He had come in expecting a game he knew how to play, but he wasn't ready for me. The tension between us grew heavier. This wasn't just about ego anymore. It was about control, about who really had it, and he was starting to realize it wasn't him. His smile was gone now. That fake, rehearsed confidence, starting to crack. You could see it in his eyes, the flicker of uncertainty, the subtle shift in posture. He wasn't used to this. He was used to control, to people nodding, agreeing, folding under the weight of his authority. I wasn't giving him that. You think, this is a joke? His voice was quieter now, measured. The kind of tone people use when they're trying to keep control of a situation slipping through their fingers. I shrugged. I think it's funny how hard you're trying. The muscles in his jaw tightened. He didn't like that. Not one bit. His team shifted, exchanging looks. They were waiting for him to reassert himself, to remind me of my place. Problem was, I didn't have a place in their game. He took a slow step forward, lowering his voice. You don't seem to understand how this works. Oh, I understand just fine. I held my ground, my expression unreadable. You talk big. Act like you run everything. But all I see is someone desperate to be seen as important. Silence. Thick. Heavy. The kind that makes people uncomfortable. His team? They were shifting now, not quite sure where this was headed. They had expected a simple exchange, a show of dominance, an easy win. Instead, they were watching their guy lose control, bit by bit. He scoffed, shaking his head like I was just another problem to deal with. You really don't know who you're messing with. I let the words hang for a second before responding. Calm, steady, unmoved, and you don't know who I am. Something in his eyes flickered, a hesitation. He was reevaluating, trying to figure me out. You think you're untouchable? He asked, voice sharper now. No, I said simply. I just know who I am, and I don't need to prove it to anyone. That landed. I saw it, felt it. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Again, but I could tell. The frustration was real now. This wasn't going the way he planned. His hand twitched at his side, like he was debating his next move. Words weren't working. He needed a different approach. I could see it in his eyes. He was about to escalate, and that was exactly what I was waiting for. He smirked. That smug, knowing kind of smirk. The one people wear when they think they've got you exactly where they want you. I recognized that look. Overconfidence. The fatal flaw of people who mistake perception for power. He adjusted his cuffs, straightened his tie, and let out a slow, deliberate breath. See, the problem with people like you, he said, tilting his head, is that you don't know when to step aside. His team chuckled. Soft, controlled, the kind of laugh that wasn't real but served a purpose. A show, a signal. I didn't react. He took my silence as submission. Good. Let him. You think being stubborn makes you strong? He continued, his voice smooth, controlled. It doesn't. It just makes things difficult. A pause. A carefully placed silence meant to make me uneasy. I stayed still, expression unreadable, letting him think he had the upper hand. He nodded to one of his men, a silent cue. That's when the shift happened. 2 steps, a presence at my side, too close, planned, deliberate, another behind me, positioning. They weren't just talking anymore. They were setting the stage. You can still walk away from this, he said, his voice lighter now, almost friendly. A rehearsed kindness, a lie dressed as a favor. All it takes is a little cooperation. Cooperation. I almost laughed, but I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I did what they didn't expect. I let them have their moment. I exhaled, slow and measured. Let my shoulders relax just enough for them to think I was second-guessing. Let them believe they had gotten inside my head. He watched me closely, looking for cracks, looking for weakness. I gave him nothing. Another chuckle, this time lower. He leaned in slightly. Smart choice. Behind him, one of his guys folded his arms, smirking. The other adjusted his stance like he was already imagining how this would play out, how they had already won. They thought I was cornered. They thought they had control. I let them believe it. For now. Because the best way to take power from someone? Make them think they already have it. They thought they had me. I could see it in their eyes, the quiet certainty, the arrogance, the assumption that this was over before it had even really begun. I let them hold on to that belief for just a little longer. Let them enjoy it. The leader, let's call him Mr. Authority, stood there, his smirk settling deeper, comfortable, confident, convinced. Smart, he said, nodding slightly, as if I had just agreed to something. I knew you'd see reason. His men shifted, relaxing just a bit. The pressure around me loosened, but only slightly. They still thought they had control, and that was their first mistake. I exhaled, slow and steady. Then I straightened, rolling my shoulders back, tilting my head just enough to make them notice. Mr. Authority's smirk flickered. Just for a second, a tiny shift in his expression, a signal that somewhere, deep down, something didn't feel quite right. He ignored it, kept going. You made the right choice, he continued. Trust me, this is bigger than you. It's bigger than whatever you think you know. People like me, we make the rules. People like you follow them. I let his words settle in the air. Then I smiled. Not a big one, just a small, knowing curve of my lips. And I saw it, that flicker again, this time deeper. He noticed the change. He just didn't understand it yet. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice just enough to make him listen. I was waiting to see if you'd figure it out on your own, I said. But I guess I'll have to spell it out for you. His smirk disappeared completely. His team stiffened. Good. Now they were paying attention. I took a step forward, just one. Just enough. And then? I dropped the hammer. Everything you just said, I continued, my voice calm, even, dangerous, is a lie. You don't make the rules. You just think you do. Silence. Thick. Heavy. Mr. Authority blinked. Excuse me? I didn't let him recover. You walk into places like this, I said, gesturing lazily, expecting people to fold because you talk loud and wear the right suit. You assume status is the same as power. But see, real power? I took another step. Real power doesn't beg for recognition. It doesn't need an audience. And it sure as hell doesn't rely on intimidation. He opened his mouth, but I wasn't done. You came in here thinking you were the biggest player in the room, I said, tilting my head slightly. But you never stopped to ask yourself one simple question. I paused. Let them feel it. Then, I hit them with it. What if you're standing in the wrong room? A shift. A visible, undeniable shift. One of his men inhaled sharply. Another subtly took half a step back. They felt it. The change. The moment the balance tipped, Mr. Authority wasn't smirking anymore. He was watching me now. Really watching. Who the hell do you think you are? He asked, but his voice didn't carry the same weight as before. I smiled again. Just a little, and then I told him the truth. The real reason why he was already losing. Why he had never been in control. And when I was done, his face went pale. Because now he understood. Now he knew exactly who he had just messed with. And there was no coming back from that. Silence. That was the first crack. Not a word. Not a breath. Just the weight of realization settling into the space between us. Mr. Authority's face had lost that smug certainty. The color had drained just a little, his confidence slipping through his fingers like sand. His eyes darted across my face, searching for doubt, for hesitation, for anything that would tell him he still had the upper hand. He found nothing. His men weren't standing as tall anymore. One shifted on his feet, arms no longer crossed but hanging loose, uncertain. Another glance toward Mr. Authority, waiting for a cue, waiting for him to fix this. But he couldn't. He licked his lips, forced a smirk, but it wasn't the same as before. It was weaker now. Hollow, cute speech, he said, voice strained. But you still don't get it. I tilted my head slightly, watching him, studying him, letting the silence stretch. He shifted under my gaze. Then, with forced bravado, he straightened his jacket and turned to his men. "Let's go. I don't have time for—" "Walking away?" I cut in smoothly. "Now? After all that talk?" That stopped him. His jaw clenched. I could see the war inside him. Stay and fight for control? Or walk away and pretend none of this happened? Neither was a win. And he knew it. I took a slow step forward. He didn't move. He couldn't. "You walked in here believing you had power," I said, voice calm, steady. "But all it took was a few words to take it from you." His nostrils flared. "You think this is over?" I smiled. "No, I think it never started." A flicker of anger. Desperation, maybe. He needed something, anything, to hold on to. And then, in a final act of defiance, he played his last card. He laughed, low, mocking, shaking his head like I was some kind of fool. "You really think this is about you?" he asked. "You have no idea what you're up against." There it was. The attempt to turn the tables, the classic "I know something you don't" routine. I let the moment sit, let the tension coil tight. Then, with a slow breath, I leaned in just enough to make him uneasy. "Neither do you." He froze. Because something in my voice, it made him believe it. His confidence shattered, his mask cracked. The weight of everything crashed down on him all at once. And this time, he was the one left speechless. For a moment, he just stood there, frozen. His mind raced, searching for a way out, a way to salvage what was left of his authority. But there was nothing. No more power plays, no more empty threats. He had lost. And, worse, he knew it. His men were shifting uncomfortably now, waiting for him to do something, anything to reclaim the moment. But what could he do? His smirk was gone. His confidence? Shattered. He exhaled sharply, rolling his shoulders back, trying to regain composure. One last effort to save face. "You think this matters?" he muttered, shaking his head. "You're nobody." I didn't flinch, didn't even blink, because that was the final sign, not an attack, not another threat, just words, thrown out like a man grasping at straws. He had nothing left. And now, he was trying to convince himself that he never needed to win in the first place. I took a step forward, slow and deliberate. He stiffened. His men took a step back. I smiled. "Then walk away." His jaw tightened. He wanted to argue, wanted to fight back. But we both knew it was over. A long, tense silence stretched between us. Then, with a bitter scoff, he turned away. "Let's go." Just like that, he walked out. His men hesitated, but one by one they followed. No parting words. No last-minute threats. Just the quiet realization that they had tried, and they had failed. I watched them disappear, then let out a slow breath. It was over. And justice had been served. The silence after a battle is different. It's heavier, sharper. It lingers in the air like smoke after a fire, the kind that reminds you something just burned to the ground. I stood there, watching the space they had occupied just moments ago. Empty now. Quiet, and I let it sink in. Not just the fact that I had won, but how easily their so-called power had crumbled. People like them, they operate on illusion. They walk into rooms expecting people to bow, to submit, to fear them. But the second someone doesn't play along, their entire foundation cracks. That's the thing about real power. It doesn't need permission. It doesn't beg to be acknowledged. It just is. I had learned something valuable that day. Not about them, but about myself. I never raised my voice, never played their game. And yet I walked away standing taller than before. Because power isn't about control. It's about presence. And presence? That's something they could never take from me. I turned, stepping away, my mind clear. 3. Lesson? Simple. Authority isn't about who talks the loudest. It's about who still stands when the talking is over. And I'm still standing. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, share it with friends, and subscribe for more awesome content. Don't forget to tap the bell icon to stay updated, and let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? Your support means the world.